Thanks so much. My name is Michelle Jolin, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Results for America. I want to thank you for joining us today for this local infrastructure hub session. We're going to talk about how federal grants can be leveraged to fund resilient infrastructure in the face of climate change and extreme weather events, which we have seen all summer long. Today, we're going to be joined by federal officials, as well as some town and city leaders to discuss upcoming grant deadlines and strategies for developing strong funding applications. So first, I'm very pleased to welcome Derrick Hiebert, Assistant Administrator for Hazard Mitigation at FEMA. Derrick, thanks so much for joining us, and the Zoom is yours.
Thank you very, very much. And again, I sincerely appreciate the invitation, the opportunity to talk with all of you. Thank you for the U.S. Conference of Mayors for organizing this. So as Michelle said, my name is Derrick Hiebert. I am the Assistant Administrator for Hazard Mitigation at FEMA. And what that means in practice is that I oversee and help lead the team that implements the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant programs, including some you may have heard of, like the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program, Flood Mitigation Assistance, and others. I also have under our portfolio the floodplain management division, and they do work supporting resilient floodplains. And I have a mitigation cadre, basically grant folks that do work related to post-disaster recovery and All right, I sincerely apologize. Apparently my internet cut out because somebody had to have it happen, so I was glad it was me. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sincere apologies again for that. So I can get this thing to work. Okay, so again, my name is Derrick Hiebert. Thank you for the U.S. Conference of Mayors for organizing this. As the Assistant Administrator for Hazard Mitigation at FEMA, I oversee the directorate responsible for floodplain management, hazard mitigation assistance grants, and the post-disaster mitigation cadre. They are the ones that deploy in case of recovery and help implement mitigation in those cases. Next slide, please. As mayors, municipal staffers, and community leaders, you understand the importance of working with emergency managers and government officials to implement strategies to build resilience. So until fairly recently, I was a hazard mitigation planner involved in state and local planning. I'm the former hazard mitigation strategist for Washington State and served in a similar role at King County. And the one thing I can tell you as executives and as those who support executives, it is utterly critical to have that executive leadership to help set priorities and establish how we as practitioners go about implementing grants, finding the right projects, and actually completing the applications. So part of our all of our grant programs, see here on the left, or the disaster grant cycle grant programs. These are the post-disaster programs in many cases, like public assistance, where you'll have programs like the Section 406 that can help you rebuild in a more resilient fashion, as well as the grant programs like Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and HMGP post-fire that provide money for mitigation for undamaged facilities, infrastructure, and structures that is based basically on a % of the total damages of the disaster. Our annual grant programs have been really highlighted in recent years. These include things like flood mitigation assistance, that is focused on reducing losses to the National Flood Insurance Program, as well as the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program. A couple of others that you may have heard about is the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program. Nowadays, that BRIC has mostly supplanted this, but there is some use of it for congressionally directed funding. And then the Safeguarding Tomorrow Revolving Loan Fund. This is what you may have heard called the STORM Act, or the Storm Revolving Loan Fund. And what this is a new way of helping communities access mitigation funding in a more direct way through a state-operated loan program that is capitalized by FEMA. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to start by talking a little bit more about BRIC, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program. So this is the premier flagship, modern, if you will, program that you've heard the administration talk about, you've heard our staff talk a lot about, and it focuses on incentivizing natural hazard risk reduction activities that mitigate risks to public infrastructure in disadvantaged communities. So what this means is it looks for projects that reduce long-term risk to natural hazards and really transform a community's relationship to risk. It has a higher project cap, up to $50 million federal share. It has a little bit more breadth in terms of the kind of projects. It's really focused on innovation, including ways of reducing climate risk and incorporating nature-based solutions. And it also includes a lot of capacity building activities, including building codes, building code enforcement, community planning, and related activities. Next slide, please. So over the past couple of years, BRIC has grown from what was originally in the first year a $500 million program in FY 2020 to last year in FY 2022, a almost $2.3 billion grant program funding projects from across 38 different states in the competitive categories, and doing all sorts of risk reduction, from seismic retrofits and hardening to wildfire preparedness to regular floodplain management and flood risk reduction projects. This slide here talks a little bit about one of our selections from FY 21, which is a nature-based mitigation and wildfire retrofitting climate resiliency project in Nevada County, California. And we liked it because it's an excellent example of using mitigation funding with nature-based solutions to mitigate wildfire risk. And so what it did was it strategically focuses on geographically vulnerable groups. So you're looking at places, at communities that have high exposure to fire hazards, but also those that have lower individual capacity. So those populations that may be more likely to suffer losses and recover slowly in the case of a disaster. And prioritizing those areas plus densely populated areas, and then those critical infrastructure and lifelines that are really essential to the recovery of a community if a disaster occurs. What it did ultimately was use natural features and a multifaceted approach to directly address wildfire risk to lives, home, and community lifelines. So it did a mix of things, including home hardening, things like using, fire-resistant building materials or replacing a shingle roof with a metal roof, to things like near home defensible space, which basically is cutting vegetation within a certain distance from your house, and then larger fuels reduction projects, as well as community education. And I really am interested in this kind of combination of things like community education and home hardening, because if you think about things like a landscape master plan that you might have if you're landscaping your property, where you would hire a landscape architect and have plantings identified and things like that, you can actually go ahead, homeowners and property owners can go through a process by which they understand and develop strategies through community education, through incentives for home hardening and near home defensible space to actually reduce their personal risk, and in so doing help reduce the community's risk, because the more homes that undertake that kind of process, the better chance a community has of withstanding a wildfire disaster. Next slide, please. Another great example of one of our more recent tools, we call it non-financial direct technical assistance to make it as federal as possible. But basically what this is experts and specialists directly helping communities on the ground to implement holistic hazard mitigation, action planning, project development, project identification for communities that are either typically more disadvantaged, lower capacity, includes tribes, territories, and communities across the country. So this program was instituted a couple of years ago and has been with the beginning of BRIC in FY 2020, but has grown substantially from, probably I think 10 selections the first year to over 40 now. And I know we're hoping to continue to expand this once we release future notices of funding opportunity. The example you see on the screen here is for direct technical assistance for the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, I recognize, this is a little bit of a larger, higher capacity community. It's a larger city. But what they were able to do here with this assistance is work with the Eastwick neighborhood, which is a lower lying neighborhood that has high flood risk, to address flood hazards, but also use this process to begin to develop to do the outreach necessary to begin the scoping process, and ultimately submitted a project scoping grant application that was going to conduct an alternatives analysis and identify the optimal options to reduce future flood risks. Now, generally, I would say that BRIC direct technical assistance is best suited to a community that really needs that additional help, identifying what is important in their community, how to protect the things that matter most in that community, and ultimately how to implement those, and ultimately helping complete an application that can be submitted for funding from one of these funding sources. But this is a great example as well of how much flexibility there is to really meet the needs of the community exactly. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to highlight flood mitigation assistance. So flood mitigation assistance, or FMA, is a competitive program that's designed to address risk. Primarily, we call it risk to the National Flood Insurance Program, but basically it's focused on projects that reduce flood risk and to insured properties. Now, this grant program over recent years has certainly experienced a fair share of kind of public awareness, especially around equity issues and subscription to the National Flood Insurance Program. But it does have a very powerful role to play when it comes to making sure that flood insurance is that the flood insurance program is protected and kept, and flood insurance can be as affordable as possible for as many people as possible. Historically, it was appropriated annually with about $175 million, but with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it was given a $3.5 billion over 5 years, so $700 million per year, which means that we're having funding rounds almost at the same levels as BRIC, as the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, which means that if you have NFIP insured properties, this can be an excellent strategy to have BRIC funding for appropriate projects that maybe wouldn't be FMA eligible, and then use FMA for projects that benefit the NFIP. Also, the projects can benefit the NFIP and other properties in the area. So a high flood risk area where maybe only some of the population is insured can still be eligible for something like a local flood risk reduction project that protects, of course, far more than just those NFIP insured properties. One of the really exciting things about this, though, is that disadvantaged communities, those that are identified using the administration's climate and economic justice screening tool, get a 90% cost share. So they're only paying 10% as opposed to the normal 75-25 split that is common under these programs. Next slide, please. An example of this program in action is a nature-based solutions related project doing flood risk reduction in Louisiana, where the applicant worked to reduce flooding due to precipitation and propose flood risk reduction and water quality improvements, consisting of flood control activities, incorporating assorted flood water storage and diversion, and doing other sort of low impact development, nature-based solutions, and other stormwater management interventions. The point being, there's a lot you can actually do with these programs, and you can have a project that both provides risk reduction, but importantly provides immediate benefits to your community upon its completion. Next slide, please. So I'd now like to talk for a second about another initiative called Swift Current, and this is an interesting one. So in response to some feedback that we've received from stakeholders, and frankly, many of us were aware of, which was the pace of acquisitions or elevations was not fast enough to be able to help homeowners or other property owners who had lost property during large disasters before they rebuilt. FEMA, working with those states that are pictured, began the process of trying to align program delivery and funding to better meet disaster survivor needs. This process over recent years has resulted in funding awards that have been successful in getting much of the money out in under a year, and that has been substantial because it's now enabling FEMA and working with these states to provide the support that applicants and community members need to remove themselves from the floodplain or be able to relocate to a lower risk area, but do so without, solely depending on flood insurance payouts that then result in you rebuilding your home in its original location, and then receiving a buyout notice later on after the home is rebuilt. It also means that this becomes a recovery tool. Money coming within that first year or two of after a disaster it really functions as recovery money in a way that money coming 4 or 5 years later doesn't. And so this has been something that we're all very excited about and are learning from and using, and we'll use these lessons learned to the extent we can to be successful in future in the rest of our programs, and trying to make sure that dollars get to the projects that are needed when they're needed, and help speed the obligation time. Next slide, please. All right, so here's some of the stuff I'm really excited about. All right, so we've talked a little bit about flood mitigation assistance. We've talked about BRIC. We've talked about the programs themselves, and I think many of you may have heard about these programs before. We've got a lot of changes in the most positive sense possible coming down the pike, based upon the feedback we've received from our partners at the state and local level, including a lot of significant enhancements, several significant enhancements to the benefit cost analysis process that I think you will find may improve the process and the competitiveness of applications quite considerably. There's been this refrain of, what about communities that are too poor to protect, or have land values that aren't maybe high enough to be able to justify certain kinds of projects? Well, we're working on that. What about projects that have long periods of useful life that basically have historically been very difficult for us to fund effectively due to the discount rate? We're working on that. What about projects that are small and maybe aren't really worth a BCA, but that you can demonstrate cost effectiveness in different ways? Well, we're working on that. These kind of changes, we hope, are going to dramatically increase the accessibility, or the access to these programs from communities, especially lower capacity communities. And let's be frank, like many of the highest risk communities in this country may have, only a couple of staff at most doing all the jobs that need to be done. I know that many local emergency managers in my longtime state of Washington were wearing multiple hats and did not have time to jump through the additional hoops. And this is something we hope will help. Also, as you might have guessed, we're readying for the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities and Flood Mitigation Assistance Notice of Funding Opportunity, as well as for a open swift current funding opportunity. The BRIC and FMA notices will come out as soon as we can. I hope soon. And and swift current is going to be exciting because that's going to be an open one, we think. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity, hopefully, to respond and have funding available when communities need it in disasters based upon various characteristics that would make the program eligible. Overall, though, what I want to say is hazard mitigation has gone from being in pre-2017, 2016, really the purview of a $120 million a year program that sometimes got appropriated and sometimes barely got appropriated, to really a priority in communities across this country. And I think it's become a priority because as we've grown, as the programs have grown, more and more communities are taking advantage of these opportunities, but also the state, federal partners, and local partners have done a lot to reduce the barriers to a successful hazard mitigation program development. This includes things like cities that are developing Office of Resilience offices that are focused on risk reduction as well as other forms of resilience, including climate resilience. And it includes things like just a greater access to different kinds of programs that are on a more reliable annual basis, or simplified approaches for the benefit cost analysis, or even things like the Safeguarding Tomorrow Act, which is going to serve as another potential source for match dollars for those local non-federal contributions that have to come from somewhere. So collectively, I think we're at a moment of a really great opportunity here. But with that opportunity, comes comes greater growth, comes new applicants and new stakeholders coming into the process. And so we are working hard to grow with the programs and to continue to have as many opportunities as possible to listen to organizations like yours and your partners to make sure our programs are adapting and developing in a way that's going to best serve your constituents as well. So with that, I think that gets me to closing. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can at this time, as well as provide an email where you all can send anything that comes afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Derrick. We're now going to open the Zoom for audience questions. I'll kick it off with a question for you. That is, does a city need to have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan in place in order to apply for BRIC funding? And what happens if an updated hazard mitigation plan is in queue for state or FEMA review? How does this impact BRIC funding eligibility?
Okay. So you do need an approved and current hazard mitigation plan to submit your application for BRIC funding. Now, with that, I'll also say that if your plan review is in queue, I would suggest going and connecting with your state partners as quickly as possible to see if what can be done to expedite that process. That process and the process between the state and the region is managed at the lowest level possible. So often it's the local planning department working with either their county or with the state, and then the state working with FEMA region. But the folks are oftentimes really focused on trying to address or trying to be supportive of whatever that community's needs are. So what I would say is, if it's under review, get in touch with the folks, let them know your plan, let them know what you need, and also get in touch with your local executives to make sure they're ready to approve that plan or adopt the plan officially as soon as you get the approved pending adoption letter from FEMA.
Excellent. Daniela, you had a question. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question? I can also ask it. Let me go back to where that question was. Let's see here. Should entities interested in applying for 2023 BRIC, did they have to submit a pre-application this summer?
So that's a state-by-state question. What I would say is, if you've got a great idea and you haven't done it already, and your state has already opened and closed that period, I would reach out to your state and ask that question. They are the ones who run that pre-application process, and then work with you to submit complete applications to FEMA.
We have another question here that says, besides income or maybe geography, what other criteria are used to describe disadvantaged communities?
So this is one of my favorite concepts and questions here, and I want to emphasize something here that I think gets kind of lost in the conversation about what is disadvantage and what is vulnerability. So there's been lots of different ways people have talked about disadvantage. We have the disadvantaged communities being identified by the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool, the CEJST. Those are primarily communities below a certain income threshold. If you look at the data, there's a number of factors, but income is the dominant one. And so those are predominantly communities below a certain income threshold that are being highlighted as disadvantaged communities. Then there are communities that are called rural and economically disadvantaged communities. And that's a size thing, basically. That's used to be called small and impoverished. It's similar. I think it's mostly the same. Then there are oftentimes tribes or tribal governments will be highlighted as communities that also receive prioritization. However, we all know that there's varying levels of disadvantage and capacity in tribal governments, just like any other government. But tribes may also be prioritized. Then there's another group, and it's the newest group, and that is the community disaster resilient zones. So the CDRs. So FEMA has recently released its first the tranche of census tracts that are identified as CDRs. That process is continuing to to evolve with the consultation with state, local, and tribal governments, as well as community partners. But that group as well gets additional prioritization. So the long and short of it is, it depends, but oftentimes where you're looking at size and you're looking at income, and size is closely related to geography. The community disaster resilience zones are also looking at potential disaster losses. But that process, as well as social vulnerability to an extent, but that again is largely an income-driven process. I won't get into the statistics of it here, but there are other factors as well. But yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Derrick. Really appreciate you being here and giving us all of your important insights. We're now going to turn to Cynthia McCoy. Cynthia is the Federal Engagement Director at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and manager of our Climate Action Grant Bootcamp. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. It's so lovely to join all of you. Just to share a little bit about my background, I previously worked in FEMA's mitigation division in both the Pacific Northwest and the Mid-Atlantic, supporting the development of hazard mitigation plans, risk assessments, and flood insurance rate maps. I also led a competitive grant program to fund hazard mitigation and resilience projects. Now I have the pleasure of working with local government sustainability directors to help them navigate the federal funding landscape and prepare their applications to obtain funding to implement their climate action and sustainability strategies. I also advise federal agencies on how to design and deliver the funding program so that the funding reaches our frontline communities. I want to go ahead and kick off our panel discussion. We have Mayor Van Johnson from Savannah, Georgia, Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland, Oregon, Jenn Cairo, also from the city of Portland, and Elaine Forbes, Executive Director for the Port of San Francisco, California. Thank you so much for joining us. I have a question for each of you about your project, which recently received BRIC funding. And then I would like to ask you collectively about any guidance you would give to other communities who are planning to seek funding from BRIC in the upcoming funding opportunity. I'd like to start with Mayor Johnson. The city of Savannah was awarded $30 million grant to address flooding risk in historically Black neighborhood. Could you discuss the key features of the funding of the project, including how the city built partnerships with community organizations throughout the process?
Sure, and thank you so much for the opportunity. It is a beautiful 81 degrees here in Savannah, not a cloud in the sky. But we also know that those days come where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it rains. We have had 70% of our severe funding events, weather events, occur since 2015, 70%, and we're a city that's 290 years old. So for this, our minority communities are generally closer to the basins, they're closer to the downtown area, and so they are disproportionately impacted when it rains. When water has nowhere to go, it goes out. And so we've had people in these communities that have had issues of structural flooding and things that have occurred over a number of years. So for us, this was an opportunity to extend what was called the Springfield Canal. It includes about 6,000 acres of predominantly developed area located entirely within our city. Using readily available information, we estimated that this would create some extreme flooding relief. And we've used computer models to help to do that, dealing with runoff and all this other technical stuff that I certainly am not qualified to talk about, but I know it's good. So for us, it's about deepening and widening this canal. Right now, we're able to convey the 2-year, 24-hour rainfall event. So it's about 4 to 6 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. With this, we endeavored to increase it to 11 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. So again, a significant amount of water to be conveyed, which would help us. So for this, it was also an opportunity as we talk about issues of creating equity within our community, being able to communicate with those. I mean, folks don't want their houses to flood. They just don't. And they don't understand why my house as opposed to other houses. And so this is a generational issue. It's a structural issue. So for us, it was really answering their question. How do we help do this so that their investments get to remain their investments? And so we've always been very, very engaged. We've upped that engagement about the purpose of the BRIC funding, how it would help us to be able to address it. Because sometimes when people see flooding, they don't understand it in a way that really makes sense. For example, they want, if it's flooding on my street, they want the flooding on their street. Why are you not putting pipes on my street? They don't necessarily understand how water is conveyed. So it comes from, the water's on the street or in the home or in the yard because the canal is overflow. Water just did not convey very well. So we had a problem. The BRIC provided us a solution. And certainly we've always engaged with communities to be able to help us determine the best ways to be able to get that done. For us, this has been a pretty straightforward process because the fact is the canal is so close to where people live and work and how they traverse around our city. And so we were grateful for the opportunity for the funding. Obviously, it is a game changer for us as we look at ways of being able to stop the inevitable from happening. We're only one really major rain event away from total devastation. And so for us, as we're able to help people remain more resilient, we're able to better prepare our community to be able to deal with issues of weather resilience.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor Johnson. I was excited to read a little bit more about the collaboration between the city and local non-governmental organizations and community-based partnerships that developed a city task force that helped to promote further mitigation of your risk in these neighborhoods. I wondered if you could speak even briefly about how that relationship was formed and how you were able to leverage the expertise and relationships in those organizations for the success of your project.
Well, for us, I think our reality is that if we have severe weather or rain events, everybody's game is off. So it really helps us to be able to bring people to the table to be able to work together. We've had several NGOs to be able to step up and want to be a part of our solution. Certainly the city using its convening power of bringing people together, not only NGOs, but really for us residents, having them engaged and involved. And believe it or not, people are very, very interested in that. And people gain an understanding of the ebbs and flows of the project. And so for us, they understood it because they've lived it their entire lives. So particularly in some of our closer communities where they've experienced this, they would adequately be able to convey stormwater runoff, which was important to existing grounds within what's called the Cloverdale community and the Carver Heights community, which are adjacent to the Springfield Canal, to minimize that flooding potential within it. We would also be able to use existing sewer and water utilities and be able to relocate some of those to accommodate some of those improvements. So for us, it's all hands on deck. There is an education process, but I think we've learned as much from our partners as hopefully learn from us.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. My next question is for Mayor Wheeler. Mayor Wheeler, Portland received $2 million in BRIC funding to improve your urban tree canopy for mitigating extreme heat. Can you talk to us about how that grant award fits within Portland's broader climate resilience goals and funding strategy?
Yeah, thanks for the question. First of all, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. It's always good to be around other city people. We all know that our window is closing to reduce planet warming carbon emissions and to avoid what some of us see as the worst case climate change scenarios. Portlanders are already experiencing extreme heat. We're seeing new records around heat, poor air quality due to smoke from wildfires. We're seeing flooding at a rate we haven't seen before and other extreme weather that's changing our lives and it's changing our cities. We also have to acknowledge the reality that not everybody is impacted the same way. Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as people from our lower income communities, are disproportionately impacted by the manifestations of climate change. And it was with that in mind that in 2020, the Portland City Council declared our climate state of emergency. We developed a very specific multi-bureau climate emergency work plan that we've been working off. It's a 3-year roadmap. In summary, it identifies key actions to reduce both our decarbonization as well as improve our resiliency goals. One of our top priorities within that work plan is growing the urban tree canopy to reduce the impacts of heat islands. It improves air quality and it mitigates flooding during extreme rainfall. So for us, that seemed like a no-brainer. The BRIC funding that Portland was awarded will specifically bolster that work as a key element of the overall strategy. I will leave it to our expert, Jenn, who's here on the line as well, to speak a little bit more specifically to Portland's urban forestry program, as well as her specific leadership around equitably increasing our resilience against the potential impacts of climate change. But what I want to emphasize is that I'm proud of the work that we're doing to increase our urban canopy. I want to acknowledge that there are many cities around the United States that are collaborating on these key strategies. And it's important for us to clarify that none of this work is being carried out in isolation. So it's really important that we continue to work together, to collaborate, to share information. We're working to reduce our carbon emission levels towards our specific goals. That's a reduction from 1990 by 50% by 2030, as well as to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And the roadmap is based on that. So the roadmap outlines a variety of specific interconnected strategies to achieve those goals. That includes increasing residential infill so that we can create vibrant neighborhoods that are close to services, as well as some obvious things like decarbonizing our fleet of city vehicles. Perhaps in terms of something that's new and interesting, one of our most significant tools that we've achieved recently is the creation of the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund, called colloquially PCEF. PCEF is a first of its kind program in the nation. It was created by Ballot Initiative back in 2018. Specifically, it makes strategic investments to reduce carbon emissions, mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis, as well as build wealth and employment opportunities for communities of color and low-income Portlanders. It is now a major tool for us in driving this work. We're constantly looking for ways to leverage federal grants and tax credits to maximize those investments in city projects, as well as work with our community partners. As you all look at federal funding opportunities like BRIC to support your climate resilient efforts, I really encourage you to think creatively about how to weave together different public, private, and nonprofit resources, and also leverage whatever innovative approaches you might have in your communities.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. I really appreciate your comment about weaving together multiple federal funding opportunities to really maximize the benefit. In my position, I'm learning that not every local entity has the capacity to go after competitive grants. So learning about what's the right fit for them, I think, is also a good strategy. I want to highlight that as a part of your 3-year strategy, you're aiming to plant over 10,000 trees in the city of Portland. What a major task. And that's
well,
quite
and if I could just add it, it not only achieves our climate action goals, the public loves it. I mean, it's relatively easy to do work in a maintenance budget. That's something we've learned along the way. You have to maintain those trees, but the public really loves it. They love to see that greenery, and it has the added benefit of being very, very helpful towards achieving our climate action goals.
Maybe an opportunity to rename or give a new nickname to the city of Portland, no longer Stumptown. Jenn, I have a question for you as the City of Portland City Forester. Can you dive a bit more into how your project will benefit the City of Portland's residents and its technical elements? I'd like to hear a bit more about how the project was identified and prioritized, the application process, and your experience working with the state of Oregon.
Yes, I am happy to do that, Cynthia. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. As Mayor Wheeler indicated, Portland has been impacted by extreme heat, as many of your towns have been. That included a heat dome event in 2021 in which 54 people died of that heat. The majority of deaths occurred in urban heat islands, which correlate with areas with a high percentage of communities that have been historically underserved and marginalized, lower income residents, and people of color. Retaining, caring for, and planting trees are some of the most effective ways to reduce a city's temperature. Our current planting strategy identifies areas most vulnerable to heat, and we've been partnering with communities to plant as many trees as our budgets allow. The FEMA BRIC grant was confirmation of our approach to treating trees as critical city infrastructure and public health services. We're one of the first successful recipients to receive an award for nature-based solutions that combat extreme heat. And the technical elements of our grant is really a scaling up of two of our existing successful programs. One of those is planting and watering trees during their establishment period along streets. We call that the Free Street Tree Program. The second is distributing free trees for Portland resident yards, the Free Yard Tree Giveaway. Since both programs are existing, successfully scaling up is literally shovel ready, which made, I think, this an easier application for the city of Portland to do for BRIC. Urban forestry prioritizes large form, native, and evergreen trees. These are high service trees when it comes to heat mitigation and other services. We also select species which are appropriate for planting location and our changing climate in Portland, and we provide 3 years of establishment care for street trees to ensure they survive and thrive. In Portland, the adjacent property owner is responsible for ongoing care of the street tree, so we try to reduce that burden. Our program is guided by growing a more equitable urban forest, our citywide tree planting strategy, which prioritizes planting in low income and low canopy neighborhoods where trees are needed most. Of the 3,500 trees planted last year, 68% were in those priority communities. The FEMA BRIC grant is one of the first federal grants we've seen that allows for nature-based solutions and treats trees as critical city infrastructure. In the grant process, we were pleased to find that the cost-benefit analysis confirmed tree planting as extremely cost-effective. And we're also well aligned with the areas where our programs are focused in the underserved communities that also support the Justice 40 initiative and respond to that initiative.
Thank you, Jen. I think it's really exciting to see how the BRIC program is expanding the different hazards in which it's funding mitigation, and so exciting to see that urban heat is being piloted for the first time in Portland, Oregon. For our last question, I have a question for Director Forbes. Executive Director Forbes of San Francisco, the city received $50 million to promote coastal resilience. Could you talk to us about the port's role in developing this project, how you've worked with the city of San Francisco and additional stakeholders that you worked with to implement it?
Yes, first, I'm very happy to be here today representing our Mayor, London Breed, and our city. And it was great to hear from the other mayors and speakers about what we're all doing in the area of climate, dealing with the climate crisis. Here in San Francisco, we're working on my role in resilience is related to the 7.5 miles of shoreline that is under the port's jurisdiction that is on terribly shaky soils. We're obviously an earthquake country and is subject now to flooding, and with sea level rise will be overtaken. 500 acres of neighborhoods in the downtown rely on the shoreline that San Francisco's, the flood protection, the flood wall that the seawall and other infrastructure provides along port property. And obviously the waterfront is of major interest and importance, both historically, culturally, economically, and additionally, many systems and their terminus is at the hard edge of the waterfront, including our transportation systems, our Muni Rail, our BART, PUC, all the infrastructure is implicated in the project that we surely need to undertake to prepare San Francisco's port and waterfront for sea level rise. So how are we doing it? And I'll talk about how the 50 million BRIC grant fits in. We actually got $425 million from our voters back in 2018. When Mayor Breed first came into office, she pushed a seawall bond. She saw the earthquake risk, she saw our engineers' reports, and she knew climate change was coming and we were already experiencing flooding. So she asked the voters to come out and pay for a future plan for a safe and secure waterfront. And they said yes, and actually by overwhelming support, I think it was 83% of the voters said yes to $425 million. The same year, our now departed and beloved Senator Dianne Feinstein and Speaker Emeritus Pelosi went to the Army Corps of Engineers and said, I'm concerned about this risk in San Francisco. We need a new start. We need a flood study. We need the Army Corps helping us figure out what to do. And we were lucky enough to get a new start. And so we've been working very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers and our own engineering team to figure out a plan to address the risk, which is both today and tomorrow's risk. And so I'm going to answer the lessons learned, and then I'm going to go into how the Coastal Resilience Project of 50 million fits into the overall strategy. So I think it's kind of come up a little bit in this conversation, but I just want to remind us all that we're better at responding than prevention, both from funding sources to capabilities. Prevention is something that is so important to all of us and sometimes gets short shrift. So we're in the prevention space here, and that's important to put the marker down that we're preventing major catastrophe or major costs by planning up front. The work on the ground, for anyone who's put it in on the ground, and I've heard comments today from the mayors and others, it's really complicated by jurisdiction, its constructability and time, some of these flood protection projects. And it's very, very expensive. It's going to cost more resources than we have. And I've heard today about the concept of leverage. And I think that's extremely important in responding to climate crisis. And I also think we are going to need to take some risks in some locations that we don't want to, because we can't afford to do it differently. And we have to be willing to accept that reality. And definitely we're going to need to make trade-offs. Which brings me to prioritization. I think it's absolutely necessary and critical that we get this work right. That's the other thing I've learned about it. And I'm really proud that we've done a lot of assessment, and the rigorous assessment of the earthquake conditions and the flood conditions and what soil is squishier than other soils and how deep it is to rock and how the above structure, including our historic buildings, how they're going to perform. All of this is allowing us to really, really, really know what it takes to make the city safe today and in the future. So I would say my team wanted me to amplify a couple of other learnings which go into this: address future conditions using the best science. Absolutely. And in that best science and data, you're going to see equity problems all over the data. You're going to see right away the most vulnerable communities are historically disadvantaged. Right away, you're going to see environmental impacts. And so addressing that inequity is critically important. Address multiple hazards when you do this work. Yes, I Mayor Johnson say people don't really know how the water flows downstream, and Mayor, we've been seeing that for sure in our multiple systems of upland water and et cetera. Add people and values to cost benefit analysis, critically important. We cannot just be doing cost benefit work here without understanding the importance of these places to people, and rely on critical infrastructure programs like the BRIC to help you get there. Before I get into the BRIC grant, I did want to say engineering with nature. I heard Mayor Wheeler talk about the tree canopy, as did Jenn. I think nature is a very powerful remedy to the climate crisis, and we should absolutely be thinking about those nature-based solutions. So now to this important grant. We have an Embarcadero Historic District. I hope you've all been to visit it and you remember our historic ferry building and the finger piers. And I hope you came to our Exploratorium Museum it's a wonderful science museum, and have gone to Fisherman's Wharf and enjoyed Pier 39. Well, in there is the National Registered Embarcadero Historic District. And it faces incredible risk, both from earthquake and its age and its non-ductile concrete and other ways it was constructed, but definitely from climate risk. And so this grant is going to help us take care of our historic district by using lots of different interventions to take care of the piers, to improve public's connectivity to the pier while we prevent flooding. So it's a very critical piece of our work, and we're very thankful for the grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Forbes. I really appreciate the point that you made about including how people value a space and the benefit cost analysis. I think it can be a challenge to incorporate the environmental impact of a project or the secondary impacts. And I'm now going to talk with FEMA about the how to incorporate the value that we put on specific places, not just the economic value in their BCA tool. So thanks for adding that. Well, I have a question that I'd like to share with all of you. And I think I'll start with Mayor Johnson. What advice do you have for cities currently seeking BRIC funding? What is a lesson learned that you didn't know when you started the application process, but it was critical to your application success?
I think in short, go hard. I think you know, this was difficult. This has been difficult for years. And I think what the scope of it, the just sheer opportunity that, in this case, equity, that you would actually change people's lives, really helped us to be successful. So first thing was go big, go life changing, but then also don't go alone. I think our benefit was that we were bringing everybody along with us. So I did mention about the Georgia Tech partnerships, our task force partnerships, the people in the community. This wasn't just a city going after this. This was an entire region, really. But really all of us understanding very clearly that we had to deal with those that were most vulnerable among us. And in this case, Carver Village, which was a community that was built in 1948 for Black people, really that for them were their first homes ever. And so this was generational. So again, this is not a problem that we started. It's something that we kind of inherited. But in this case, we're going to be able to put, the other thing is to put skin in the game. So on the other end of it, this BRIC money is put along our special purpose local option sales taxes that will be a force multiplier for the work we're already doing in the canal, widening the basin. So again, you know, I think going big, going together, and then putting your own skin in the game to help to accentuate the point.
Thank you for that. Same question for you, Mayor Wheeler. What advice would you give to cities who are currently seeking BRIC funding? What were some of the key lessons that you learned that maybe you didn't know when you first started the application process?
Yeah, thanks. And I don't want to take credit for the actual work that Jenn did, so I'm going to let her answer this on her own in just a second. But two quick things. First of all, obviously the BRIC funding, it's not the core of your work, but it certainly should be in alignment with the work you're already doing around climate and resilient strategies. And then just the second sort of pro tip here is make sure it's consistent with the Biden administration's Justice 40 programming. In other words, make sure that your application clearly states how your proposal addresses the needs of people impacted the most and first by climate action. So BIPOC communities, lower income communities, and the like. I would say those, from my perspective, are the two key issues. I'll leave it to Jenn to talk about lessons learned. But before I do that, Elaine, how could you not mention Buena Vista on the San Francisco waterfront? It was certainly one of my favorite places, I confess. Jenn, to you.
Thanks, Mayor Wheeler. I would add that it is really important to be shovel ready, as I talked about before. And I think that's easier to do these days because we know where the focus areas are pretty much universally for federal government, state and local governments is Justice 40 type initiatives. We're focusing on the historically marginalized communities, Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color. So our programs already should be doing that. And we know that the climate crisis is real. And so our programs are already focused there. Being aware of and tracking what the federal funding opportunities might be like BRIC and seeing how your programs will connect to those is critical too, so that when the time to apply comes, you're really ready and can show that you're able to leverage the funds effectively. And I too want to give credit where credit's due. I did not complete the grant application myself. So thank you to Biz Miller and Beatrice Oxford and Angie DeSalvo from our team. And the last thing I'll mention is it does take time to prepare a successful grant application. And so identifying folks who can make that time and do a good job of the application is important as well.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. And to you, Executive Director Forbes, if you can also answer the question, what advice you would give to cities who are currently seeking the BRIC funding?
I agree with all the prior comments. I would say work with your partners who have interest in or can contribute to the project on the ground before you go forward with the BRIC. For us, it's the SF, our transportation system lead, SFMTA, our Public Utilities Commission department, our Public Works department, our Parks and Rec department. So by the time we come forward with our request, it's fully vetted and understood inside the city so we can maximize how we approach things, because cities can be complicated. They are very complicated. And we need to make the complication less chaotic and more streamlined in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Executive Director Forbes, and thank you all for taking time and answering these questions with your very thoughtful answers. I appreciate you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you, mayors. Thank you all. Thank you, Cynthia. Really appreciate those fabulous insights and really helpful information. Before we end today's session, we, of course, as always, want to hear from you. So want you to ask you to take a moment to fill out the quick Zoom poll. While you're filling out the poll, I just want to give you a couple more pieces of information about our resources and upcoming opportunities. First, for cities with a population of 150,000 or less, registration is open for our Flood Mitigation Assistance Program boot camp. Participants in this boot camp will have access to subject matter experts, office hours, individualized coaching, peer learning, a library of templates, example submissions, a whole set of other resources. So I hope you'll visit the link in the chat to learn more if you're a city with a population of 150,000 residents or less. We're also sharing our 5 winning strategies for building resilient infrastructure and communities. This will be in the chat for cities to reference as they seek BRIC funding. And we also have a table that outlines the background and deadlines for the federal grants available to address flood mitigation. All of these links are in the chat. Also, in partnership with Accelerator for America, we've developed a case study on Hoboken, New Jersey, and their successful flood mitigation efforts. Take a look at this in our best practices on BRIC grant implementation. Tomorrow at 2, we're hosting a tech and innovation session on how predictive 3D models of urban systems can help cities build resilience, identify critical points of failure, target the most vulnerable populations, and prioritize how they deploy resources before, during, and after crises. And then finally, the next big grant opportunity session is on Tuesday, October 24th at 2 p.m. We'll be discussing funding sustainable and equitable transportation projects. And as always, I hope you'll check out the calendar and resources on our website, which is localinfrastructure.org. And want to thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.